international and Arab organizations and figures denounce the ugly crime of Khan al-Assal and affirm it represents an escalation to obstruct political solutions. Al-Halaqi stresses that the country possesses a strategic reserve of foreign currency and will continue to enhance the potentials of our people's steadfastness. The Syrian Arab Army inflicts heavy losses on the armed terrorist groups in Homs and Idlib. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and happy Teachers' Day. Several states and Arab and international organizations, parties and figures have denounced the terrorist crime committed by the armed terrorist groups in firing a rocket that contained chemical materials on civilians in Khan al-Assal in Aleppo suburbs yesterday that claimed the lives of a number of citizens and injured others.
Iran has strongly condemned the armed terrorist group's crime in firing a rocket loaded with chemical materials on Khan al-Assal in Aleppo, branding it as a hostile step against humanity. Iran, through its foreign ministry spokesman Ramin Mehmanprest, expressed solidarity with the relatives of the victims and called on all human rights institutions and organizations to condemn this ugly crime and shoulder their responsibility in this regard. On its part, Russia reiterated condemnation of the terrorist act. The Russian ambassador in Lebanon, Alexander Zaspkin, stressed that the situation in Syria requires from all, particularly the concerned parties, to reconsider their stance and to agree on the principle of dialogue and the political process in order to find a way out of the crisis. Political parties and Arab legislative and media figures, as well as men of religion and analysts, such as the Popular Will Party, the Kurdish National Movement for Peaceful Change, the Syrian Human Rights Watch Network, and the National Figures Presidium in the occupied Palestinian lands, have warned that the use of the armed terrorist groups of a missile that carries chemical materials is a dangerous precedent that threatens with direct foreign intervention. They affirm that this ugly crime has come at a time when all Syrians are pinning hope on national dialogue and a political solution to get out of the crisis that has entered its third year. They describe the crime as clear evidence to the international support of the USA, Western countries and Zionism for this terrorist act which intended to destroy the Syrian state and people.
Prime Minister Dr. Wael al-Halaqi today chaired a meeting of the Ministerial Committee in charge of following up the economic situation in light of the repercussions of the current crisis with the view of adopting a package of immediate and future economic measures to enhance the steadfastness of our national economy. Dr. al-Halaqi said Syria's enemies, having felt that the march of national dialogue has started, embarked on escalating their terrorist acts on the ground through using all kinds of internationally prohibited weapons in order to intimidate our people. This was accompanied by a misleading media and a planned, ferocious, comprehensive economic war, Dr. Halaqi added. He stressed that this requires the government to take new economic measures and mechanisms of work that would limit the reduction of the Syrian pound exchange rate against other currencies and protect citizens' livelihood requirements. The meeting discussed some of the measures that the Monetary and Credit Council, as well as the central bank in each governorate, would take to stabilize the Syrian pound, pursue those who trade with the country's national economy, and protect citizens' livelihood needs. Al-Halaqi said that despite the current economic challenges, we have a strategic reserve of foreign currency. We are holding on and capable to enhance the potentials of our people's steadfastness, Dr. Al-Halaqi stressed. On his part, the governor of the Central Bank of Syria, Adib Mayale, said there is a government plan and current measures to compensate the reduction in the Syrian pound exchange rate against foreign currency. He added that the government continues to finance with foreign currency the country's basic imports. Our armed forces have continued to chase terrorists, destroying their hideouts in Homs and its suburbs. In Bab al-Turkman neighborhood in the city, the army forces demolished a number of vehicles that carry terrorists and weapons. Army engineering units also dismantled 25 explosive devices planted by terrorists at the entrances of buildings and roads in Bab Houd. The army targeted terrorist gatherings in Al-Rastan and Al-Sayyad farm in eastern Al-Buwaida, Ibil, Al-Dab'a and Ayun Hussein, inflicting on them heavy losses. Another army unit intercepted a terrorist group in Jurat al-Shayyah in Homs, killing and injuring its members. In Idlib suburbs and in cooperation with inhabitants, our armed forces destroyed a vehicle carrying terrorists who had kept assaulting citizens and perpetrating acts of looting in the summer residences in Jabal al-Arba'in at Bzabur village crossing point. 200 Syrian refugees who were staying at a Zatari camp north of Jordan returned home, escaping the harsh conditions in which they were put. Colonel Zahir Hafez Abu Shahab, the general commander of Jordanian security in the camp, told the visiting parliamentary delegation that 250 Syrian refugees apply daily to leave the camp, as 2,000 others had already submitted requests to be transferred into other Jordanian cities, out of which 300 requests are approved weekly. It is to be noted that dozens of Syrians have already returned their homeland, escaping the inhuman conditions imposed upon them in the camp. On the 10th anniversary of the Anglo-American invasion of Iraq, terrorist blasts continue as a car bomb blast went off in the area of Zayuna, east of Baghdad, killing 2 people and injuring others. Al-Qaeda in Iraq claimed responsibility for a series of terrorist blasts that hit several neighborhoods in Baghdad yesterday that targeted restaurants, bus stops and shops, killing and injuring at least 265 people. For his part, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said that intelligences of a regional country that he didn't name was responsible for yesterday's series of blasts in Baghdad. In a press statement today, al-Maliki vowed to chase those involved in the attacks, rejecting calls for dealing calmly with the terrorists. Al-Maliki urged for national unity in the face of the wave of violence that is instigated by regional intelligences. Russian Foreign Ministry said that Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov and the First Deputy of U.S. Secretary of State Rose Guitimiola discussed over the past 2 days in Geneva prospects of mutual work within the framework of non-Logar program. In a statement today, Russian Foreign Ministry said that the 2 parties discussed in detail cooperation within the framework of the agreement on moving and dismantling weapons, in addition to the disarmament treaty signed between Federal Russia and the U.S. in 1992, which is known as Non-Logar Program. The statement added that both parties reviewed a number of issues covering disarmament and non-proliferation of unconventional weapons, including the formation of a nuclear-free zone in Asia. Russia and U.S. also discussed the disarmament conference in Geneva and the preparations for the meeting of Warsaw Initiative member countries. In occupied Palestine, the Israeli forces of occupation arrested dozens of school children after breaking into 3 schools south of Hebron in the West Bank. This coincided with the campaign of arrests and incursions in Al-Hijr area around Hebron University. Meanwhile, other Israeli occupation forces were deployed in Bir al-Mahjar in the city. On the other hand, Palestinian activists broke today into a settlement area near Ma'ale Adumim, adjacent to the occupied Jerusalem, and they started to build tents upon which raised the Palestinian flags. The event occurred with the arrival of the U.S. President Barack Obama to the occupied Palestine. Back to our local news, and despite the unprecedented wave of terrorism waged against Syria, targeting schools and educational facilities, among many other things, Syrian students and teachers celebrate Teachers' Day, expressing determination to go ahead with their educational programs and activities.
In these exceptional circumstances Syria is going through, teachers in particular played a vital role in keeping the educational process alive, challenging all difficulties and proving that they are truly the carriers of light and knowledge, spreading a noble message in their society. They were able to offer sacrifices for the sake of the homeland, spreading enlightenment against the militant agenda of the Takfiri terrorists who targeted the nation's infrastructure and tried to impose their own darkness on the whole society. It is to be noted that more than 179 teachers have been killed by the terrorists, and more than 2,445 schools were damaged, let alone the crimes of kidnapping, which affected more than 300 workers in the field of education. However, despite all these crimes, the acts of destruction committed by the terrorists, Syrian teachers in most cities and towns continued their heroic efforts to render the educational process successful. That's why teachers deserve to be honored and respected for the outstanding role they are playing in terms of building the intellectual fabric of society and spreading knowledge as an effective weapon against all forms of terrorism.
In order to achieve a distinguished intellectual status at the international level, the tests for choosing national teams for the Syrian Intellectual Olympiad on the subject of mathematics, physics and chemistry will kick off tomorrow. Head of the Syrian Intellectual Olympiad, Imad Muwaffaq al-Azib, said in a statement today that the National Olympiad Committee has decided to launch the Olympiad test according to basic geographical gatherings. The first will be held in Damascus and will include participants from the southern region, and the second in the governorate of Tartus, and will include participants from the coastal and central regions, and the third in Aleppo, and will include participants from Aleppo and Idlib. According to test results, participants will be chosen to represent Syria in the International Olympiad to be held in 3 different countries, including Denmark, Colombia and Russia, depending the subject selected by each country. With this, we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more news about Syria and the region, and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. Now to latest business and market news with Vani Gonjian after a short break.
Good afternoon. The manager of the fuel company of Damascus stressed that providing fuel to the governorate is the priority of the company and the stakeholders in Damascus, adding that the material is available, but the problem is the method of providing and transporting it from the warehouses due to the current circumstances. On the other hand, he said that the quantities of gasoline distributed by the branch during the last 2 months were estimated at 37.6 million liters and about 56.5 million liters of diesel. The decision taker in the branch fuel committee in Hama Governorate, Engineer Hassan Ajib, asserted that the committee started distributing the necessary amounts of diesel fuel, which are about 10 million liters, to run the irrigation pumps of wheat and sugar beet crops. Brent rebounded from the lowest level in 3 months, widening its premium to American Intermediate crude for the first time in 4 days, while Brent futures were up as much as 0.7% after sliding 1.9% yesterday, the biggest decline since November, while the U.S. crude stockpiles declined by 413,000 barrels last week. European stocks were up, snapping a 3-day loss, while Asian shares excluding Japan were little changed. The U.S. stock futures climbed, indicating the Standard & Poor's 500 index will snap a 3-day decline as euro area leaders weighed options for Cyprus and investors awaited the Federal Reserve's monetary policy decision. Gold traded below a 3-week high in London as investors awaited the U.S. Central Bank's latest policy statement and amid concern Europe's debt crisis may get worse. Gold for immediate delivery lost 0.1% in London. It reached $1,615 yesterday, the highest since February, as futures for April delivery were down by 0.1% on the COMEX in New York. The dollar index fell while the pound rose against the dollar. The euro rose the most in 5 days as Cyprus sought alternatives to the European Union plan to help the nation avoid a banking collapse. With this, we conclude our news. Thank you for watching and goodbye.